I'm building on the work of others. I'm building on the work of the historian of religion, Charles Long, and my dissertation advisor, Gordon Kaufman, right? So I'm kind of building on their work. For me, I want to kind of think about religion in relationship to the fact that we humans occupy more than one social space simultaneously.
Hello and welcome to It Means What It Means, the podcast in which a guy with some college and a day job has long-form conversations about biblical text. Today's guest is Anthony Pinn. This may end up being a pivot point for the podcast. I'd been thinking about it for a while, but the biblical texts conversation being the foundation, which we transitioned at some point early on from it being, a guy with some college and a day job asks experts questions about biblical studies. And then I realized, let's kind of focus on biblical texts because that broadens things out, and I can talk to clergy, or I can just talk to people who are from a tradition, and I can look at how people engage in myriad ways. It doesn't just have to be academics talking about biblical studies. And that has been helpful. We've had conversations about ethics. You won't have heard it yet, but I recorded one just today about some social and political stuff that's going on right now in the United States. But I've been seriously considering broadening the scope, and I'm looking into ways to do that. For now, the tagline is going to stay the same, at least. But this may be the episode that the tipping point for that. For me saying, like, maybe there is more to this, that I have interests in so many different areas, which is why a Bible podcast was so enticing for me. And it simplified things and streamlined them in a way that I could focus on something that, in spite of a lack of expertise, I could draw an audience in. And I'm getting to the point where I would rather just have interesting long-form conversations. This is not a particularly long episode, and part of that is because I got caught off guard. I know this happened with the Nadia Williams episode as well, but for a different reason. I think Nadia was just really good at engaging with the questions I was asking and wrapped her answers up very effectively. That's kudos on her for communicating. The issue here was I was truly wrestling with what he's talking about. And I'm not saying that in I disagree with it way. I'm saying that it opened my eyes to a breadth and a depth and a complexity and a nuance that religion and religious studies did not seem to have to me. And now I know that that's not the case. And for a book that's around 100 pages, maybe slightly more than 100 pages, in the book that at least motivates the discussion here. That is a lot. I will circle back to the longer book that the book we're discussing is kind of a compressed version of. This is kind of a notice that, hey, things are coming that are maybe not, strictly speaking, simply about Bible. I think also, and maybe this is apparent to you at this point now, the conversation that I really want to be having a lot of the times is a conversation about unconditional love. And there are a lot of places that can go. And I'm okay with that. And I hope that while I'm still in the process of building an audience, that I can maintain interested listeners, engaged listeners that I've had so far, but also add to their number with people who are curious and who are looking to be a part of long-form conversations. And so in that vein, I will say, send me your guest suggestions. I don't care how unrelated they may seem to the stated purpose of this podcast. I want to hear what they are. So yeah, all that said, if you want to reach out to me, please do so at itmeanswhatitmeans@gmail.com. All one word, itmeanswhatitmeans@gmail.com. And I will take your input under advisement. Okay, that's all I have to say. So here is my conversation with Anthony Pinn. Anthony Pinn, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, before we get going with that, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm the Agnes Cullen Arnold Distinguished Professor of Humanities and Professor of Religion at Rice University. I also serve as Director of Research for the Institute for Humanist Studies. It's a small DC based think tank that's affiliated with the American Humanist Association.
Okay. Today we are going to be discussing your book. I have it here. I have it here. What is African American religion? And this is so I've read a few of these before, but it's been a long time. This is the Fortress Press Facets series, and they are much like the Oxford University Press very short introduction. They're short books that introduce you to something, and they always do a good job of it. So it's, I mean, you're in my opinion, I saw that this was there. It was like, all I've ever read is like guys like Richard Horsley and things like that. So I know this guy's in good company. I want to pick this up. And then when I came home and started Googling you, I was like, ooh, Rice. Yeah, I definitely need to get as many Houston folks as I can on the podcast. So this is a slim volume, but it's a kind of a companion piece to a larger work. Is that the case?
Yeah, it draws some of the major ideas from the book Terror and Triumph, The Nature of Black Religion. It kind of distills some of the nuggets from that text.
Well, I will definitely look for that one. But I got this and I wanted to get you on. So I hope this goes well enough that you'll want to come back on and talk about
Oh, sure.
the larger project. Well, hold on. You reserve the right to say you didn't care for it. Okay, so I want to start with my first question that I sent you. Is the answer to the book, the question asks that African American religion is simply whatever any individual African American believes?
No, it's not quite that. And so with this, I'm trying to move away from the assumption that religion is really about doctrines, creeds, and institutions. My argument is that religion at its core is a quest for complex subjectivity. That is to say, religion at its core is the human effort to wrestle with the fundamental questions of our existence. Who are we? What are we? When are we? Why are we? It assumes no particular doctrinal form. It doesn't require churches, mosques, or synagogues. It doesn't have any particular ritual structures. All of those are the historical stuff that we associate with this deeper yearning. And so to ask whether this involves Black folks being able to believe whatever isn't to really get at what I mean by religion, because undergirding all of that, whatever folks believe, is a shared desire to make life meaningful. And for me, it's acting on that shared desire to make life meaningful that constitutes religion.
And so that's, it seems like the bridge between various different groups, but most of the book, it seems to me, addresses either African American Christians or Nation of Islam, but it could be anything anybody believes, but it's in this coalescing principle.
Well, what I'm suggesting is that these are two highly recognizable case studies. And so, what I'm getting at is if you interrogate Black Christianity and you interrogate the Nation of Islam, at their core is this desire to wrestle with these questions. And it's that wrestling that constitutes religion. It's not the beliefs, it's not the ritual practices, it's not the aesthetics. All of those are historical manifestations of this deeper impulse. It's like saying that these beliefs are religion is like saying clothing is the body.
Okay. So how does it play out in day-to-day life, do you think?
It plays out in rather mundane, unspectacular fashion. And so this wrestling, again, doesn't require any particular setup. You don't have to wait until Sunday at 11 o'clock to do this, right? You don't have to wait until Friday. This desire to come to grips with how we occupy time and space, this desire to understand what it means to be human, what it means to be us, and what it means to exist in the context of this world, that sort of wrestling takes place everywhere, all the time. And so, what I'm suggesting is we have to think about religion differently. And rather than being preoccupied with the stuff we've typically named, It's really much simpler, more inherent, and it's simply this desire to know who we are and how we fit.
So yeah, that was a concern I had. It was like, man, I hope this isn't just, okay, well, let's try to be in the aftermath of slavery or segregation or in the midst of racism, let's try to reject things. So it does sound like you're talking about embracing, I don't know, character, identity, uh, a new reality, hope.
I'm saying what a fundamental dimension of what it means for us to be human, to be persons of deep value and worth, has to do with how we wrestle with our value and our worth. And it's not tied to what we believe, where we go on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. It's not about particular practices we engage in. What our fundamental humanity is tied to our effort to know how we occupy time and space and why we exist.
So 2:30 on a Tuesday, the way that you work or play or eat or maintain your home, is that
Or that walk you go on, that long walk around the bayou is the occasion for this religious thinking.
I can tell you're getting used to Houston life, walking around the bayou. Um, and is it an individual thing or is this a communal thing?
It's both, right? It's the individual in the context of community. So we have this wrestling, right? We're trying to figure out who, what, when, where, and why we are. And we present our findings through beliefs, through practices, through rituals, through aesthetics. And we find people who have a very similar take on what it means for us to be. And they become our community. But again, what I'm suggesting is these beliefs, this clothing, these rituals, they are all the historical manifestations of a much more fundamental yearning. And it's that desire to make life meaningful.
Okay, that's helpful. So those things are artifacts, and what you want to look at is what do the artifacts point to?
Yeah, think about it this way, right? So it's a Tuesday and I have to teach. And I understand myself as an instructor. My job is to help people develop critical thinking skills and effective communication strategies. And I want to represent this understanding of myself. So I put on one of my favorite suits. Now, that suit doesn't really tell you a whole lot in and of itself. It's representative of a more fundamental feeling, yeah, a more fundamental understanding. And it's that fundamental understanding I want to get at. And my argument is I think people have been too preoccupied with the clothing in that scenario, as opposed to the feeling, the yearnings that motivated me putting on those clothes.
So, what are the substantive differences in where you end up as opposed to your colleagues who you think are missing it in uh, they're in pursuit of maybe the more, I don't want to say superficial, but that's the first word that's coming to mind, but the vestiges, I guess.
I think that too many folks, in thinking they are wrestling with religion, are really wrestling with the residue of this religious impulse. They're looking at what this religion generates as opposed to what this religion actually is.
How do they end up there, do you think?
Well, because we assume that religion is by definition doctrine, creeds, ritual structures, churches, mosques, and synagogues. We assume that this stuff that gets manifest historically, that houses our yearnings and our desires, is in fact this thing religion, as opposed to simply being the residue, the byproduct of religion.
So rather than the churches, mosques, and synagogues, you're concerned with everywhere that people are before and after they're
No,
at the
I'm
churches, mosques,
rather
and
than churches,
synagogues.
mosques, or synagogues, I'm concerned with what urges the development of those things. And what urges the development of those things is what I want to name religion.
Okay. Um, so I guess I'm thinking, if you think in your neighborhood, the church, mosque, or synagogue that first comes to mind, what are the things that you would point to in your neighborhood that urge the existence of that church, mosque, or synagogue?
Well, you know something about Houston, so let's go to Main Street, right? And there are all of these different churches, different denominations lined up on Main Street. Yeah. Now we have all of these churches on Main Street, these different denominations on Main Street, because there are things they disagree about, doctrinal things they disagree about. They have differences in terms of practice. And my argument is, well, if you cut beyond all of that, you dig below all of that, what you get is a shared desire to know, a shared desire to be able to situate human life, to make sense of human life. That is the shared impulse. That is religion. This other stuff is simply how we go about dressing up religion.
So the what versus the how. Okay.
So I go down this street, down Main Street. I see Presbyterian church. I see a Methodist church. Right, I turn the corner. I see First Unitarian. Radically different. But for me, what undergirds all of them is this shared impulse, this yearning for complex subjectivity. And it's this shared impulse that actually constitutes religion. The rest is how we dress it up.
So are they cooperating whether they mean to or not, in your
Well,
opinion?
it's not about whether they're cooperating or not. It's about this fundamental human desire to know. They all share that.
Well, yeah, no, that's what I mean. I mean, they are, well, I guess there would be like consciously cooperating and then unconsciously cooperating, in that they all are driven by that same
Right.
fundamental purpose.
So they are similar in that they all stem from this basic human impulse. And now, to push that question, what does that mean in terms of doctrines, creeds, practice structures? That's of little interest to me, because for me, that is just the residue. That's not really religion.
Yeah, no, I like that. So this is, it takes some work for me to translate that and cut through what I'm used to, So if we were going to talk about well, it's not even about Christianity, right? So so oh man, so it's a fundamental impulse, you think, in all of us.
It's part of what it means for us to be human. And others have phrased it, and I think in ways that point to the same understanding. So the theologian Paul Tillich talks about religion in terms of a, a, a kind of fundamental desire, right? A kind of fundamental yearning, this fundamental thing that we seek and what that prompts us to do, right? So it's not related to any particular doctrine, any creeds, or it's our ultimate concern and our ultimate orientation, right? What is our ultimate concern? What grounds everything we think and do? And what kind of orientation, what kind of practices and creeds does that generate, right? How does that move us through the world? Now, Paul Tillich, in naming religion this way, doesn't set out a particular denomination or a particular tradition. It's something more fundamental. It revolves around our ultimate concern and our ultimate orientation.
So, but with the question, on the front of your book, it's well advertised. What is African American religion? Are there things that distinguish it from other religion, or is that just not even the point?
Well, I think what distinguishes it is African Americans have encountered our social world in a particular way. And so these sorts of questions of meaning asked by African Americans are responsive to and shaped by the social world as they've encountered it, right? So there's something about the ways in which African Americans ask this question of meaning that is shaped and filtered through a history of anti-Black racism. Now, my argument is, and I make this argument in the larger book, that I am not suggesting only Black people experience religion this way. African American religion becomes a case study. I'm saying that religion across racial groups is premised upon this impulse. But what shapes and twists the nuances of how this question is posed is shaped in part by the social world as we encounter it. White Americans encounter our social world in a particular way, right? So, for example, have a particular relationship to race and class as a collective, not individuals, as a collective. In the same way that African Americans as a collective have experienced the social world in a particular way. And that shapes how this question of who, what, when, where, and why I am gets asked.
So I have the questions that I sent you over here, and I notice. So I noticed a question that I'll read the question as I sent it, but then I'll kind of try to rework it because I do want to show the juxtaposition in how I'm understanding this now as opposed to when I sent them. So the way I sent it is the movement away from religious belief and community in the broader American culture occurring in African American religious communities as well. What I would say is that growing tendency or growing number of people to identify as none, does that impact your thesis, or is that just incidental?
Again, this doesn't have anything to do with doctrine, so it doesn't really impact. My argument would be how people respond to this fundamental question, this yearning for complex subjectivity, shifts and changes, but to the degree that religion doesn't presuppose a belief in God or gods, to say that the percentage of Blacks who claim no particular religious affiliation is growing is not to say they aren't religious, right? It's simply to say how they deal with this yearning does not fit our traditional structure, right? The way they are dealing with this yearning, this quest for complex subjectivity, for them doesn't fit the church. It doesn't fit the mosque. It doesn't fit the synagogue. So
So
that
what's
is to say that Black nuns aren't Christian, aren't Muslim, but they can be religious because they're wrestling with this fundamental question. And for me, it's this fundamental question that names religion.
but the benefit for people who have a mosque, church, or synagogue is that is the place where kind of on the ground they are able to engage with and I think there's a lot to this idea that there is an impulse that's deeper than any particular creed or confession or anything like that, but that's how they engage with it. I think a lot of people despair over the fact that it seems like there's less social engagement overall in any of civic life, I guess you could say, in any of the multiple spheres that exist. It seems like there's dwindling participation within those. Is that tied up in this
Well,
too?
I would disagree. And that what we can say is that a growing percentage of the US population no longer finds the kind of community churches, mosques, and synagogues provide compelling. They don't find that compelling. But that is not the same as saying they don't have communities. They have very different communities. And I would agree that there are ways in which some of the in-person points of contact no longer appeal, but there are lots of folks for whom online community is just as rewarding, just as nurturing. So I think people find the like-minded. But in the 21st century, we just find them in very different ways.
In fairness, I said a lot of people despair. So that's not a thesis that I particularly prescribe to. I think things like loneliness have always. I think people are people, and we're not that special. I think we have so much in common with people thousands of years ago or people a few decades ago. But the bowling alone kind of thesis blending with demographers seeing fewer people engaging in religion, and then I think this an overall an expressed cynicism about politics. I think I agree with you. I think they belie a deeper, unarticulated or slowly articulated sense of what the world should look like.
Well, and I think that perspective, again, assumes that the church is religion, that the mosque is religion, right? And I'm trying to work against that. And so, again, I would argue that folks are finding the like minded in radically different ways. And I think Black Lives Matter, for example, that movement would suggest that Black people not going to churches doesn't mean that they are without commitment, that they are without colleagues, that they are without community. But Black Lives Matter has formed community in a way that doesn't require in person engagement, right? There's kind of robust connection that is virtual, and that works for a lot of folks. And I think for some, they can't see that as meaningful because they assume gathering on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday as the way in which you do this.
And I would throw probably a more forgotten example, but after Occupy Wall Street got cleared out, I remember reading articles about some Occupy activists shifting away from just protesting to working with people whose homes were being foreclosed on. And I'm bringing that up not because
Mhm.
I think everyone has to agree with the aims or the complaints of Occupy Wall Street, but I think a much more substantive. So yeah, no, I'm kind of coming around. I'm gelling around how I would understand this. That I think what happens is churches, mosques, synagogues are social institutions that we have used as a shorthand for religion, and as society is moving to different things in a way to express this fundamental drive, uh, maybe, and you said it better than I have. This fundamental drive, they're finding other avenues to satisfy that desire.
Mhm.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's right. But I also think it's important to keep in mind that the Pew Foundation, for example, right? Pew studies suggest that lots of these folks who claim no particular religious affiliation are deeply committed to social activism, deeply committed to social change.
Yeah, and I think there are also people who do identify with a religious identity who are not like they will say explicitly, "I am an evangelical," and are not regular attendees at church. I think we're in a very weird time for some of these things that were always very easy to read. It's a strange, peculiar time, and a lot of things are changing in the way that people relate to one another,
Mhm.
and the idea that I have friends all over the world. I'm middle aged now, and in my life, I've accumulated friends who live all over the place, and I can communicate with any of them in a
Mhm.
way that when I was my son's age was not accessible to me,
Mhm. Yeah,
and that's a thing that we have to grapple with. And
yeah.
so, is the term okay? So you've been using the term religion. Is there much daylight between religion and spirituality, in your opinion?
I'm not quite certain what to do with the terminology of spirituality. It's nothing I really make use of. Yeah, it doesn't figure into my thinking. It doesn't figure into my research. I think it's a rather slippery term. When it's used, I think often when I hear it used, it's folks who are dissatisfied with the institution, are dissatisfied with the infrastructure of traditional modes of so-called religion, right? Christianity, etc. They are discontent with some of the ways in which those institutions hamper expression. And so for them, spirituality becomes a way of critiquing these traditional modes of expression. But I don't know what it points to other than the human in relationship to something bigger than the human.
That's, I mean, that's the sense I've had of it, and there have been times that it's been a particularly useful way of understanding. Like it's been a helpful nexus for moral and ethical understanding for me And I know I've spoken to other people who are like, what does that even mean? And they bat it away. But I do kind of like that you have planted your flag on the word religion, and you're like, this is not a bad thing. This is not, whether it's the things you like or the things you don't like about that building down the street or that organization that you had a good or a bad experience with. This is still something bigger. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still concerned with the individual in relationship to community, right? The individual in relationship to something bigger. What that looks like will vary. But I hesitate in part to use the terminology of spirituality because I tend to understand spirituality as a way to name critique, but I'm not quite certain what to do with it beyond that. It's too slippery for me.
I guess I hold out hope though for people who do need that word because of a trauma or abuse that they have suffered that they carry with them. If that's the way for them to get back in there, then uh, in my opinion, more power to them. And I don't think that you're saying like stop using that. No one's allowed to say spirituality.
No, I'm
I
talking in terms of my understanding, right? I'm not suggesting what other
Yeah.
people ought to think about the terminology, but in my work, this is my understanding.
So you did use the term complex subjectivity, and that plays a pretty significant role in the book. Can we camp out there for a little bit? I
Sure.
thought that was an interesting term that I had not ever experienced before. Is that something you came up with? Where does that come from?
No, I'm building on the work of others. I'm building on the work of the historian of religion, Charles Long, and my dissertation advisor, Gordon Kaufman, right? So I'm kind of building on their work. For me, I want to kind of think about religion in relationship to the fact that we humans occupy more than one social space simultaneously. And that religion, this effort to wrestle with these fundamental questions, is also an effort to hold together in a productive way these various markers of identity, right? To hold together our occupation of various social spaces, right? To make us whole in a sense.
Do you see attempts? I'm trying to be careful how I word this. Do you think that there are people who want to undermine your understanding of what religion is?
I don't know if it's that active. I think there are people for whom this doesn't work, that there's no there there. That is to say, for them, this understanding of mine doesn't point to anything that's compelling.
And so are those do you find that those people tend to be uh, participants or adherents to a particular tradition, or are these people who are rejecting the idea of religion overall?
Yes, it's both.
Oh, both. How does that play out in either of those cases?
At its best, it involves really interesting, engaged debate. At worst, it becomes a form of name calling.
That's unfortunate. So, what do you think the results are from like if we follow the trajectory of, and you can pick either one of those groups, where do you think that leads us if we were to start to listen to them?
Um, for those who think there's no there there, that this doesn't point to anything compelling, we are locked into the old conversation concerning these long-standing institutional forms, and we miss out on some of the creativity, some of the imaginative ways in which people are finding meaning. And we end up limiting our conversation to institutions that are struggling for relevance, as opposed to looking at the various ways in which people have expanded their worldview, expanded their presence, expanded their thinking. And for those who are like minded, it provides an opportunity for us to further unpack what this might look like, right? To tackle it from a variety of angles, vantage points, and perspectives. So we get a much more robust, a much thicker description of what religion entails as a quest for complex subjectivity.
Okay. Um, so I don't want to. We got about 20 minutes left. So, is there something from the book that you wanted me to ask about that I left out? And remarkably, for such a small book, there's a lot there, and I know I did leave a lot out.
Well, I think we've covered a fair amount. What folks typically leave out is the applicability of this theory beyond Black communities, right? The assumption that this only applies to Black people, or the assumption that because it's written by an African American, can only speak to Black people, right? So we've thankfully sidestepped that kind of understanding and are kind of lodged in the recognition that this is really a human enterprise that isn't bound by particular social codes. And so I think the conversation's in pretty good shape. I'm enjoying it.
And so, are there, other than this book and your other book, which will be in the show notes, where would you direct people to learn more about this? And that could be books or podcasts or YouTube, whatever.
I think there's a follow up to Terror and Triumph, The Nature of Black Religion. This follow up came out in 2021. It's called The Interplay of Things. And it's my effort to further unpack this theory of religion, to correct it and tweak it in some ways. And so I would point listeners to that book, The Interplay of Things, 2021.
Okay, that'll be in the notes too. Now, my favorite question: what do you read for fun?
Well, I'm just now I just finished last night this book, Slave Road, and I started a new book by Zora Neale Hurston. It's based upon a manuscript that was damaged after her death. Many of her materials were burned, and this book was saved. It's missing some components, but it should be an interesting read. It's a novel that explores the history and legacy of Herod the Great.
Okay, so historical fiction in that case.
Yeah, I'm assuming that Zora Neale Hurston also wrote some long time ago a book called Moses, Man of the Mountain, a retelling of the Moses story. And my assumption is that this is also a kind of witty, typical Zora Neale Hurston take on a biblical figure.
Yeah, so I don't think either of us knew about that, but I just had a conversation I was editing recently with a text critic, and we were kind of bemoaning that there aren't enough, like there are books like Circe or Song of Achilles or Grendel or whatever, where they take this, an ancient thing, an old thing, and they do a novelization of it. And we were both kind of bemoaning that it seems like there aren't enough of those from like biblical characters. So that is one that I did not know about. That I'll have to check that out.
Moses, Man of the Mountain is brilliant, and this book on Herod I'm looking forward to reading, but I just started it, so I've only made it through the introduction. I'll take it up again tonight.
So what else do you do to decompress? Like what is your leisure time spent doing?
I love walking the bayou.
Do you?
Oh, I love walking the bayou, Memorial Park, Herman Park.
So that it's interesting that you went into Main Street. So for listeners, you don't know, Houston is like 150 suburbs. That's most of what Houston is. He lives in actual Houston proper,
yes, inside the loop.
Inside the loop, and I live in one of those suburbs. So most of my time is spent on one of Houston's many interstate highways. Just to try to stop grinding my teeth because I don't know why we're not moving, and then being frustrated when you get there and the traffic just evaporates, like there was no cause to it. So it is, other than today. So this is January 21st. It is a hot and humid city, but right now we have some nice cold weather out there. So if you're going to go out and walk that bayou, make sure you bundle up today.
Well, not today.
Not today. Not at all.
Bayou day. No.
That's fair. It's pretty rough out there. So, well, unless you have anything else for us, I'm going to go ahead and call this one good.
No, I mean, I've enjoyed the conversation with you. Delighted to do it anytime.
Anthony Pinn, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Next up on the podcast will be Tom DeBrain, and we will be discussing fan fiction in early Christian writings and the idea that you could use fan fiction the idea that there is fan fiction studies was new to me, but the idea that you could utilize fan fiction studies to understand the early development of texts and narrative and community in early Christianity, which is the aim point of this particular book. So that was a really fun conversation. I'll end things here by saying if you get a chance to love someone, you should take it. Now, here's a preview of my conversation with Tom DeBrain. Take care.
So parts of it is about fan fiction, and parts of the book is about how fan communities work, and looks at aspects of how communities try to keep people out of their community that they don't like, which of course resonates with any community we're in, because all communities try to keep certain people out by definition. And there were some really fun overlaps between how fan cultures specifically portray people that they don't like in their group as either too female, too feminine, or too childish. And this resonated very strongly with some of the things that I knew quite well from early Christianity as well. I mean, most famously is Paul calling his people in his church children, and the things where he says, like, I used to drink, milk, but now you should be having meat, but you're still these childish children. And that goes on in fan communities as well. There were some really fun things that I discovered that show the way that early Christians seem to be trying to get rid of undesirables in their community without immediately going towards, they're heretics, but like portraying people in a certain way in the hope that they either change or go away, which I thought was very interesting. And then maybe one other thing, the very, very last chapter talks about the way that everything you read creeps into your brain. So once you've read a fan fiction, whenever you engage with the original text, that fan fiction is still going to be in your mind and is going to influence the way you see that original text. And this is, of course, also true for the Christian texts, and that's true for us nowadays as well. If you go read a whole bunch of Apocrypha, it's hard to read Mark and not imagine the Apocrypha in the background as well, and think about the things that you read out there. So there's this creep from the Christian world, the story world, all of these stories together, which we also have in art and things like that, that seems to be affecting the way that canon is read as well, which I think is a very, very important and interesting concept. Some of the things in there still ended up in people's brains as if it's in the Bible, even though it's not.